Okay, friends, this is patch 3.18, and we are going to go attempt to kill Cyrus. So, character for this league is an Ethereal Knives Chieftain. It'll be interesting because this character is actually pretty easy DPS. I don't know how it's gonna go. Let's find out.
I cannot.
I've been having quite a bit of fun with this character overall. Very tanky.
Did you really think
As I mentioned, not much DPS, but it maps fairly well due to a combination of Ethereal Knives being a good mapping skill and some other stuff that I'll talk about in the build overview, but isn't super relevant for what we're doing right now.
Take it. It's yours. But Orius, I will
Yeah.
burn to the ground.
Let's give it the old college try.
Will finally stir.
Itself. Fury of the cosmos. Pointless.
What's this? A real challenge. You finally caught my attention. Die.
Legions. Auto attacks move the needle a little, but not fun.
Watch beauty crumble.
So the reason that I have Righteous Fire on is because I have Divergent Righteous Fire. And Divergent Righteous Fire gives me a bunch of spell damage. Plus, I have 90% maximum fire resist from Mark the Flesh.
Obliteration.
The others found strength in their projections. They became reliant on it. I'm not so foolish. Die.
Beyond, there is only horror.
Die.
Okay, we still Legion, which is bad. Don't do that.
This city is nothing.
So there are a bunch of Uber versions of all of these bosses in this patch, because they did a sort of very cool emblem update. Which means that the thing that I'm fighting is not actually the hardest version of Cyrus. I don't know where this is on the threshold of like Awakener 8 to Awakener whatever. I don't think it's as hard as Awakener 8 is.
Die.
But we'll see.
Die.
I cannot. Your lives are meaningless.
Following the standard pattern here. Down, down, and then left. Remember when I was doing this on the Guardian and was all like confused about where to go and what to do? Turns out that 3 expansions worth of playing, I guess way more than 3 at this point, it's been like 5 or 6, will improve your character and your ability to do the fight. Okay, now we actually have to actually dodge things.
There is only horror.
Get out of stuff, as it were.
Everlasting fire. Die.
Whoop. Took a bunch of stacks. That's not good. We got 3 seconds left, 2 seconds left. Okay, we're good. As you can see, build is very tanky. Doesn't have capped chaos res, but that's about the only thing. Whoop. Over. Round.
Everlasting fire.
Whoop. flame dashes are having such problems. Guess I'm pretty pissed.
Beyond, there is only horror.
Whoops. You don't get to find out whether or not I can tank a meteor. Okay. So yeah. All in all, we did the thing. But yeah, I will probably do a. Well, I don't know. We'll see. Let's just talk about the build now. Gonna be a little. Try to be a little shorter than I was last league, because that was long and annoying for everyone involved. So we're playing a chieftain, as you can see. Bellico, Catalio, Namahu, and Hinakora. Shock, horror, right? Like, we're using Thread of Hope to get a bunch of notables. Hi, Chi. Ta-da! Cat. Get a bunch of notables. But this is our big sort of thing, right? Like, Avatar of Fire plus Namahu means that we are fully converting all of our physical damage, so we are doing full fire damage despite being a Ethereal Knives being a physical spell. So we scale fire damage and do all sorts of things there. Like you can see we've got like Divine Fury, Magmatic Strikes, but we can, anything that we do to scale physical damage also scale stuff. So we have 2 cluster jewels that are the sort of standard 3 prop physical jewel, and then we have 2 herald jewels to get heraldry, which gives us exposure, and then we have empowered envoy and purposeful harbinger. Purposeful harbinger gets us a bunch of aura buff effect, which is very important, and then the other projectile. Oh, whoops! I forgot. Okay, this was a silly thing to do on my part. I'm supposed to use 2 of these whenever I'm fighting bosses, because Eye to Eye and Repeater. Eye to Eye is the one that is do a bunch of damage if you're next to the enemy, and this is for mapping. Like aerodynamics is projectiles pierce, so you can, when you're mapping, you throw out like an ethereal knife and it goes through like 3 or 4 things. Beyond that, we're getting all of this stuff. Because we're scaling aura effect, we snag, a bunch of just the max life nodes. This is our inspired learning slot, but we get full value out of it because we have our max life node, another max life node, an endurance charge, and since we're a chieftain, we have 6 endurance charges, like you saw. And then so we get like sort of a mini headhunter thing, which is actually better this league because Arch Nemesis gives you more bang for your buck when you get a modifier. And so Arch Nemesis monsters, like if you remember my last video, are actually sort of a core part of the game now. Rare monsters just have Arch Nemesis. We're getting to max fire res with this right now. Once we have some gear upgrades, we won't need to do that. But yeah, and then Iron Will causes strength stuff to apply to spell damage, so you get additional damage there. So all in all, pretty cool build. But the big thing here is Melding of the Flesh. So this one, basically what this says is you lose a whole bunch of res, essentially like another Katava penalty for all intents and purposes. But then if you can get something to 90, all of your maximum resistances are 90. And because Chieftain has this, you can essentially ignore fire resistance for all intents and purposes, so you just have to scale max fire res somehow, and so there's a bunch of ways of doing that. If we look at my gear, small ring, okay, worthless. If we look at my gear, we are heavily scaling Purity of Fire, right? So we have this in a Viridi's Veil with +2 Socketed, And then we are, scaling this, so we get, 5 max res from that, and then our chest has Purity of Fire, has Aura Effect on it, as long as plus max resist. We've got +1 resist on the ring. Oh, that's right, I forgot to modify this. Yeah, those two have leveled us up with Elemental. Yeah. And then we have 3 on the shield, and I'm doing the thing that I promised I wouldn't do. And this is where, like, these gems, this gives me a ton of projectile speed, this gives me a ton of spell damage, and so this isn't even the expensive version of the craft. This should be +2. And then the gloves are really nice. So this is using the new influences, well, the influences that were introduced last league, but using them more effectively. To pierce and unnerve, so get a couple debuffs, and then using a system that they added this patch called Recombination, where you take 2 items and sort of smash them together, and it gives sort of an arbitrary result. There's a bunch of it's not arbitrary. There's a bunch of rules for how the items fit together, but the TLDR is that this was made with Recombination. And so you can see it gets a bunch of increased damage against chilled enemies, and because I have Skitterbots chill the enemy, so I do more damage. All of my important stuff is life tapped, so you can see here, here, and here. That's so that we can reserve almost everything, because this build is very, very, very tight on. We've got Herald of Purity. This is another one. It just scales physical damage, and then, like, obviously our Herald cluster jewels, and then we've got the blue ring on the left side, which means that we're immune to crits. Viridi's Veil is really cool. This is the first time I've gotten to play with this hat, and I've been very impressed. And then just sort of a standard plus Phys gems cast speed, some spell damage, and then multi-mod craft. Working on right now, actually, on getting a better one of these, but it'll be a bit. I talked about buff effect, max fire res. This is a stand-in. This will eventually become an Ashes of the Stars, but Ashes of the Stars is very, very expensive this league. They're now like a 1 in 40 or 1 in 50 drop rate. So they're 40 or 50 exalts. Where last league they cost basically nothing. So I just have sort of a generic. About half of these are useful. Like the armor, you can take or leave it. The cast speed is obviously quite useful. This build scales heavily on cast speed. Maximum life is useful. Phys gems is useful. So yeah. Beyond that, Stygian Vice. Slammed the T1 Warlord damage. That was good. You see, like we need like the really big fat resistance rolls on a bunch of stuff, and you can see we're looking for cold and lightning basically everywhere. Because fire is taken care of. These boots need upgrading. The sapping up enemies, if you're like running around, like the little sort of lightning that you see trailing after me, is the sapped ground from the boot effect. And then I get regeneration from endurance charges, in addition to the existing regeneration that I get. So yeah, that's really about the extent of it. Let's show off the defenses just for. So this is a bit deceptive. We have a on-hit Amethyst Flask, so while that's active, we are basically, like, we're nearly capped for cast resist. For all intents and purposes in softcore, we're essentially capped. The character's died about 220 times in total, up to this point, but dies very rarely now. It's mostly when I'm doing really stupid things like Simulacrum, which I got to wave 25 without dying, but then died a bunch because it's just, again, fairly easy DPS character. So I died to Kosis and I died to Omniphobia at the same time because they spawned too. Yeah. Anyways, I will stop there because I'm just rambling around. But yeah, fun build, fun league. A+.